Hi, everyone. Judge Andrew Napolitano here for Judging Freedom. Today is Wednesday, July 10th, 2024. Phil Giraldi will be with us in just a moment on the IDF and American tax laws, and also on some of the things President Biden just said a few minutes ago. But first, this. You all know that I am a paid spokesperson for Lear Capital, but I'm also a customer, a very satisfied customer. About a year ago, I bought gold, and it's now increased in value 23%. So $100 invested in gold a year ago is now worth $123. If you have $100 in the bank, it still shows $100, but $100 in the bank is now worth 24% less. Inflation has reduced all of your savings, all of your buying power, and mine, by 24%, and gold is largely immune from that. If you want to learn how gold will soon hit $3,200 an ounce, call Lear Capital, 800-511-4620, or go to LearJudgeSnap.com. Get your free gold report. Same experts who predicted the 23% rise that I've enjoyed have predicted this $3,200 an ounce gold. Learn about how to transfer this to an IRA. Protect your savings. 800-511-4620, LearJudgeSnap.com. Tell them the judge sent you. Phil Giraldi, a pleasure, my dear friend. Thank you for joining us, as always. I do want to talk to you about this crazy connection between the IDF and the American tax system, which has a lot of people scratching their heads because of your expose in a recent article about it. But before we get there, today NATO is meeting. The actual formal meeting is Thursday, but they're gathering already. President Biden is speaking to them already. I'd like to run some clips about what he said. I didn't know this, but according to the president, we have, well, I'll let him tell you the number of American troops in Europe. Cut number 6.
Even before Russian bombs were falling in Ukraine, the alliance acted. I ordered the U.S. reinforcements at NATO's eastern flank. More troops, more aircraft, more capabilities. And now the United States has more than 100,000 troops on the continent of Europe.
Saying it as if he's proud of it. Aren't they sitting ducks, since some of them are in places like Romania and Poland, from which the military equipment which attacks Russia is received, assembled, loaded, and dispatched?
Yeah, and Russia has already said that they consider themselves to be at war with NATO. And so we've sent these people over there. They're in a very vulnerable position. We are not at war technically with anyone. We, when this whole imbroglio started, were not threatened by Russia. We're not threatened by what was going on, but now our great president, over the course of time, has put us in a situation where our soldiers and sailors and Marines are very vulnerable. And, here we, U.S. citizens, have never had a say in this. We're in a war situation. I think this is a disaster in the making. It will not change the outcome of Ukraine versus Russia, and all it will do is kill more people and cost billions of dollars of more money just thrown away. This is ridiculous.
I'm thinking about our mutual friend Gerald Celente, who always says when all else fails, they take you to war. We know his campaign is failing, his public persona is failing, his donors are leaving him. Do you think those troops are there as a tripwire? Some of them get killed, and all of a sudden we have a reason to declare war on Russia because they killed our troops?
Well, funnily enough, this is the first thing I began to think about when this was kind of developing, that these soldiers were going over there and placed in a vulnerable position. I was thinking about the October 7th incident in Gaza, where, to my mind, right from the beginning, it was clear to me the Israelis knew this was coming, and it was a setup because they wanted to go into a war and to resolve what they saw as their issues by going to combat. Now, are we doing the same kind of stupid thing? I don't know.
Well, I hope I'm wrong, but I fear that they're there as a tripwire before we get to Israel on October 7 and Haaretz and the Lancet and the American IRS. All of this stuff is connected. Phil will explain it in a few minutes. Here's President Biden in the same speech, again, just earlier today, boasting, this is really crazy, Phil, Ukraine can and will stop Putin. Number 7.
In Europe, Putin's war of aggression against Ukraine continues. And Putin wants nothing less than Ukraine's total subjugation, to end Ukraine's democracy, to destroy Ukraine's culture, and to wipe Ukraine off the map. And we know Putin won't stop at Ukraine. But make no mistake, Ukraine can and will stop Putin.
I mean, the bitter irony, the irony couldn't be any more bitter. You talk about destroying Ukraine democracy. He and his colleagues are responsible for the coup in 2014 that destroyed Ukraine's democracy when they chased the popularly elected president out of the country.
That's precisely correct. And the current crisis had its genesis in that act. We were basically interfering. Victoria Nuland admitted that we had spent $5 billion destabilizing the government in Ukraine so we could overthrow it. I mean, this is the reality of what we're confronted with. These people are crazy, and they're not answerable to the American people. It's like they were given some kind of commission to go berserk, and this is and plus Biden's comments are nonsense. If Russia had wanted to take over all of Ukraine, it would have happened right away in the beginning. Russia had the capability to do that, but this has never been Russia's intention, and Russia certainly has no intention of recreating the former Soviet Union, which is essentially what he just said. I mean, we know he has dementia. Is he crazy on top of that?
Wow. One more before we get to Netanyahu and company, although I wonder if Prime Minister Netanyahu heard the clip we're now going to run, because the last line of this clip, though it doesn't mention Israel or Prime Minister Netanyahu by name, obviously implicates them when he says Ukraine goes to the front of the line. They get all the ammunition first before anybody else. Cut number 8, Chris.
In the coming months, the United States and our partners intend to provide Ukraine with dozens of additional tactical air defense systems. The United States will make sure that when we export critical air defense interceptors, Ukraine goes to the front of the line. They will get this assistance before anyone else gets it.
Wow. Now, what will Mr. Netanyahu, who will be there on the floor of the House of Representatives, being treated like a conquering hero rather than the war criminal he is 2 weeks from today, say about that Ukraine is at the head of the line, not Israel?
Well, I rather suspect there will be a backhander going on here, where Israel will be getting a matching amount of weapons and probably more money. And maybe Netanyahu will, kind of restrain himself a bit. But this is insane talk out of Biden. Ukraine to the front of the line. This is talk. This is war talk, and it goes beyond war talk. It's a declaration of war on a certain level, and this is frightening stuff.
It almost is when you consider the following. The Americans were responsible for the use of cluster bombs on a beach in Sevastopol 3 Sundays ago, at which a half dozen people, including 2 children, were killed and 100 and some odd were injured. The Soviet foreign minister, who's the dean of foreign ministers of major countries, Sergei Lavrov, called in the American ambassador, and she was shaking when she left when he said to her, we are no longer at peace with your country. The Secretary of State and the Soviet and the Russian, I almost fell for that trap, Soviet. The Russian foreign minister spoke by phone, and suddenly the U.S. apparently has stopped sending reconnaissance drones and other devices over the Black Sea. And now this from President Biden, it's almost like we're just a couple of bombs or a couple of sentences short of an out and out war, which maybe he wants. Maybe that will rehabilitate his failing presidential campaign and the perception of him as seriously mentally challenged.
Yeah, I mean, and the Russians responded to the technical aspects of that bombing on the beach in Sevastopol by basically saying that this is an escalation, and if you keep sending these surveillance craft to the Black Sea, we will shoot them down.
Right. Chris, put that up again. I want to read it. This is, it's a full screen. This is from Sergei Lavrov at the time, and then we'll go to Israel and the IRS. What a connection there. The U.S. is responsible for this massacre, referring to Sevastopol, and they will get an answer. All flight missions for American ATACMS missiles are programmed by American specialists based on their own U.S. satellite intelligence data. He's right. Therefore, the responsibility for the deliberate missile strike against the civilian population of Sevastopol lies primarily with Washington, which supplied this weapon to Ukraine, as well as with the Kyiv regime from whose territory this strike was launched. Such actions will not go unanswered. That was 2 weeks ago. I'm thinking of our Italian ancestors who used this phrase. It sounds better in Italian than in English. Revenge is a dish which tastes best when eaten cold. Putin is a very, very patient, pragmatic man, and whatever his response to this will be, it might come at a time and in a manner that the Americans least expect it.
Yeah, Putin is a chess player, and he is calculating what the options are for Russia, and of course he will be thinking, unlike our president, in terms of what benefits his country and what will send a clear message to our country that these people are not patsies. They're not going to be sitting and waiting for someone with the mental capacity of Joe Biden to make a decision about what the Russians will be allowed to do or not allowed to do.
What is the connection with certain IRS regulations and the IDF? Can people actually deduct from their adjusted gross income taxes money that goes to kill Gazans, to slaughter individual innocent civilians?
Yeah, it's interesting. When I was doing the research for the article, I was quite aware of what they call a 501c3, which normally is a charitable contribution or an educational or religious contribution, or in other words, something kind of beneficial in nature. There are two major, shall we say, organizations in the United States, one located in New York City, the other one located in Massachusetts, that are essentially conduits for raising money for the Israeli army. Now, if they were doing that, raising money and then paying tax on what income they were getting from doing this activity, I would say fine. But here I discovered that both these organizations, one is called the Friends of the Israel Defense Force, and the other one actually claims to be affiliated with the Israeli Ministry of Defense. And both these organizations are 501c3s, so they get to send their money to Israel, the money they raise, and it's tax-free from any kind of federal tax. And the donors who give them in the United States, who give this money to these organizations, are able to write this money off on their taxes. So we're subsidizing an organization which pretty clear is carrying out a genocide. And I wonder, how does this happen?
How much financial aid does I don't know if you could even calculate this since it comes from so many disparate sources in light of what you've just told us. Do you know, or do you have a handle on how much financial aid the federal government gives directly or indirectly, like through these tax deductions, to the state of Israel in a year?
Yeah. A colleague of mine, Grant Smith, whom you might be acquainted with, has been looking into this issue for some years now. And he has calculated that in his estimates, based on the fraud that takes place in terms of how this money is transferred and so on and so forth, there are a lot of foundations that have been set up that basically support illegal activity on the part of the Israeli government, like building settlements and what it's doing right now in terms of the Palestinians. So this is quite a common procedure. Jared Kushner's Family Foundation basically has been engaged in raising money illegally to fund settlements illegally in Israel. So this happens quite often. Well, anyway, Grant Smith has calculated that the U.S. in one form or another gives Israel probably more than $1 billion a month.
Wow, $12 billion a year.
Yeah.
And does this take into account the money that Congress just authorized in that last vote that they took that had $61 billion for Ukraine and $5 billion for Taiwan? I think there was another $13 billion in there just for military supplies. So I think the $12 billion you're talking about is in addition to this, no?
That's in addition to the $14 billion that was appropriated in April as part of that omnibus $91 billion spending package. Yeah. And that was on top of this.
Wow. Wow. Since we were together last, Phil, the oldest and most respected medical journal in the world, the British journal, the Lancet, has produced exhaustive research which causes them to conclude that it is more likely than not that 186,000 human beings have been killed in Gaza from military activity, from the destruction of buildings, from disease, from famine, from the various causes of death triggered by the Israeli invasion. This number is staggering to me. It's, as you can see on the full screen there, it's 8% of the population of the occupied country. Were you surprised at this number when you saw the Lancet piece?
Yes, I was. I thought that I have long thought that buried within the rubble of Gaza, there are probably as many dead Gazans, dead Palestinians, as the number that keeps getting acknowledged in the Western media, 37,000. It's been at that number for months.
Right.
And yet every night, the Israelis go on a bombing spree in Gaza, kill more people, destroy more buildings. I believe just yesterday or the day before, they bombed a refugee center. They killed 29 people in one bombing. And this has been going on and on and on. And then there's famine on top of it because the Israelis are blocking food supplies and medicine. And so this number astonishes me to a certain extent. But Lancet, as you noted, is extremely reliable and extremely trusted. And then we have the U.S. Congress, which just voted to forbid the State Department from using any numbers coming out of Gaza about deaths and injuries and so on and so forth, if the source comes from the Palestinians or anyone associated with them. So there's like a cover-up going on at the same time.
I don't think that will pass. The House of Representatives is out of control This is the same group that purported to define anti-Semitism and to instruct the Department of Education that any educational institution that permitted anti-Semitic views to be articulated on their campuses, the Department of Education, without going through the courts, could just deny agreed upon federal aid. I don't think either of these pieces of legislation will pass the Senate, but we'll see. Haaretz, the Israeli daily newspaper, sometimes antagonistic to Prime Minister Netanyahu, sometimes supportive, just released a thorough investigation on the so-called Hannibal Directive. I hate this euphemism. It's murder. It's shooting people in the back. It's shooting at a car when it's driving away from you. This is the so-called instruction to kill IDF soldiers and Israeli civilians, along with the Palestinians who are with them on October 7th. Haaretz actually published copies of the emails, texts, and other written memoranda demonstrating that it is more likely than not that more than half of the 1,200 Israelis who died on October 7th, and I'm sorry for anybody's untimely death, were killed by the IDF.
Yeah, this has been hinted at for some time. There were reports some months ago coming from helicopter pilots and soldiers who were part of the counterattack that took place immediately after the situation with the hostages developed. And they said, essentially, we went in there shooting, and we were in there, shooting at everything that moved and some things that didn't. We were blowing up houses where people were being held as hostages. We were doing all of that stuff, and this has been a kind of on the board for a while. And now, of course, Haaretz, which is again a very trusted and reliable source of information, critical of Netanyahu, and they've come up with the documents. And this was the Hannibal objective, which is essentially to kill people who might potentially become hostages, to kill Israelis, including soldiers, including civilians who might potentially become hostages, because that would put the Israeli government in a bad position.
Some of the people on this show are owed apologies. You, Scott Ritter, Max Blumenthal, Aaron Mate, Anya Parampil, who reported this a long time ago, that the Israelis had used their so-called Hannibal Directive. And again, I hate the euphemism. The Israelis had had instructed IDF soldiers to kill other soldiers and to kill civilians. Isn't this also a war crime? Isn't this more evidence? Isn't the 186,000 deaths of civilians more evidence for the case for prosecuting Prime Minister Netanyahu, Defense Minister Gallant, and the State of Israel itself?
Yeah, of course. And let's go beyond that. This is a case for prosecuting our Secretary of State, our President, and the whole national security team. These people certainly knew about this, had the information, and basically went ahead with continuing to supply Israel with weapons and money, and most of all, political support for whatever they did. Israel was basically home free. They could kill anyone they want, and Joe Biden and his team would do the cover-up.
Oh, wait a minute.
This is where we're at.
Wait a minute, Phil. Here's Matt Miller, the spokesperson for that team, being confronted by a reporter at one of his press briefings with this Haaretz report. What's this?
I wanted to ask you first if you read or heard about the Haaretz report on Israel employing the Hannibal Directive on October 7th.
So I did see that report that moved over the weekend, and that's the limit of my knowledge of seeing that report from Haaretz.
Does that make you change your position or your perspective on what really happened that day, that the Israelis may be responsible for killing a majority of the people that died on that day?
Boy, it certainly does not, Saeed.
Doesn't.
I don't think
Okay.
there's any
I just
question.
wanna-
I don't think there's any question that
All right.
that it was Hamas. Just let me finish. I don't think it's any question it's Hamas that is responsible for the overwhelming number of deaths
Right.
on
Okay.
October 7th.
And your friend and former colleague, Ambassador Charles Freeman, saw this. He said, this is one of the reasons that this is the least respected American State Department in the post-World War II era, when somebody like this is their spokesperson and can say something like he just said. Your thoughts?
Sure, he's lying and he knows he's lying. And, you know, this is the kind of government that we have now. And people joke about, you know, historic governments that in the past who were bumblers and so on and so forth. This is the ultimate. I mean, we are murderers. We are accomplices in murder. We are basically the enablers of murder. And yet we get this clown standing up and he denies that any of this could possibly be true. Oh, give me a break.
Well, you're right, Phil. It's a sad story. It's great to chat with you, even when we talk about these awful things. Thank you for the piece you wrote about the IRS and the IDF, and thank you for coming here to explain it. I will be in our homeland for 2 weeks, so we'll see you again next, I hope, at the end of this month. Thank you for all your time. Thanks for joining us, my dear friend.
Well, thank you and have a very good trip.
Thank you. All the best. Coming up today, thank you, Phil. Coming up today at 4 o'clock, Aaron Mate. He just had a knockdown drag out. We're going to play some of it for you on the Piers Morgan show. And of course, he came out smelling like a rose, but I'm a little partial for him. That's at 4 o'clock today. Judge Napolitano for Judging Freedom.